Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we are covering Porsches and we start today with the Porsche 911 Turbo S, 560 horsepower, 3,607 pounds of weight. Now one of the issues we could see with these Porsches is the fact that they are rear engined, and what that means is you put an awful lot of weight over the rear end of the vehicle. And what that means is you should get a lot of oversteer, particularly if it's a rear wheel drive vehicle. One of the ways you can solve that is by giving the vehicle four-wheel drive, as Porsche has done with this 911 Turbo S. Now that would also be the reason it's the heaviest car here today. It's actually the heaviest by quite a bit as well, at 3,609 pounds. However, that does put it around the Nissan GT-R, Audi R8 range. And ultimately it does drive very much like a four-wheel drive supercar would. For me, this is sort of the best in-between car of all of those. It doesn't quite have the handling of the Nissan GT-R, but it is better than the Audi R8. It doesn't quite have the straight line speed of the Audi R8, but it is quicker than the GT-R. It's sort of the best in between of those two. And to be honest with you, this is the vehicle I would rather drive, or even rather own in real life, to be perfectly honest with you. The GT-R doesn't really do much for me, and neither does the R8. And the 911, I think, is a pretty decent looking car. These new ones are definitely much better for me than the old Beetle-derived air-cooled versions. Next up we got the Porsche 911 GT2 RS, 611 horsepower, 3,020 pounds of weight. Now this is the most powerful car here today. In fact, before the 918 this was the most powerful production Porsche ever. Having driven this in previous Forza Motorsport games, I wasn't really sure what to expect from the GT2 RS. I seem to remember this thing had extremely rock-hard suspension. It was almost a bone shaker when it came to the bumpier tracks. GT2 RS in this game doesn't quite have the same issues. However, it doesn't drive particularly great. You do feel the sort of weight over the rear end. This is rear-wheel drive, unlike the Turbo S. Which does mean you can get some oversteer from this, but it isn't too bad. There's a little bit of understeer as well. I'm going to put that down to the fact there's not too much weight over the front end of the vehicle, so there's not really much pushing the front wheels in, I guess. But yeah, the GT2 RS though was extremely quick in a straight line. This thing is stupidly quick. Probably one of the quickest Porsches around, to be honest with you, when it comes to straight line speed. It is ridiculous. This thing could upset some hypercars when it comes to its straight line performance. Next up we got the Porsche 996 GT3, 381 horsepower, 3,160 pounds of weight. Now the 996 GT3 was a car I wanted to test around here to see how it would cope compared to say modern sports cars like your BMW M4s, Lexus RCF, Jaguar F-Type. Because it is down on power on those vehicles as I get a huge slide through the first corner. 381 horsepower isn't a lot when it comes to sort of modern sports cars. Now granted, around this track that's about mid-range of what you usually see come around here. But it isn't an awful lot when you compare it to sports cars. 3,160 pounds of weight, however, is a lot lighter than the modern sports cars, so I was genuinely curious about this car. As far as to drive, the 996 is actually pretty decent. It's a little bit boring, I would say. The only really notable handling characteristic of this car is some slight understeer, but other than that, it's pretty nice to drive. Again, not particularly the most inspiring vehicle in the world to drive, but it isn't too bad. Straight line speed's okay. 381 horsepower, as I said, isn't a particular lot, so straight line speed isn't great, but it's definitely adequate. I mean, it's a quick car, but it isn't as quick as some modern sports cars may be. And our final 911 for today is the Porsche 911 Turbo. This is the 1983 model, 296 horsepower, 2,866 pounds of weight. This is on paper the slowest car here today. This is only a C-Class car. However, I was curious to see how the 1983 Turbo would both drive and how it would do compared to some other vehicles. The first answer to that question is it drives okay. You definitely can feel the rear-engined, rear-driveness of this vehicle. It does want to slide. It feels like essentially you turn into a corner, you got loads of grip, and then all of a sudden if you turn for a little bit too long the rear end will just smack around on it. It's an issue I had with a car which is coming up a bit later on as well. So that was a little bit of an issue with the 911 Turbo. Other than that, it was alright, I guess. You do get a little bit of front end lift. That's another issue you could have with rear wheel drive cars. I got a little bit with the GT2 RS as well. Thankfully this doesn't have nearly enough power to really make it that big of an issue. You can recover it, unlike the rough CTI Yellowbird from Forza 5, which was extremely bad. But yeah, 911 Turbo wasn't the quickest in a straight line, it has to be said. It wasn't great. Another thing, I'm kind of expecting to see this around sort of the late 90s sports cars, maybe hitting into the hot hatches. We'll have to see when it comes to the end of episode. Lots of understeer there as well across the line. Next up, we got the Porsche Carrera GT, 605 horsepower, 3,258 pounds of weight. This was the first Porsche supercar, or sorry, the first mid-engine Porsche supercar, I should say. And yeah, the Carrera GT, a car I've never really liked, to be honest with you. I've never really liked the way it looks. And to drive well, it drives very much like the 918 does, which is kind of surprising to me. Now, the 918, granted, is a bit nicer to drive because it's four-wheel drive. This, not so much. It's rear-wheel drive, so when that rear end slides out, you can't really just boot it and get away with it. You do have to correct it. However, it would make a good drift car. It's relatively controllable when the rear end comes out. It just snaps on, though, which is a little bit disorientating. Straight line speed is fantastic in this vehicle. I'm not sure what's quicker out, the GT2 RS or this, but I would be genuinely curious to see. And of course, the Carrera GT makes one of the most fantastic noises I've ever heard. Honestly, I don't know what it is about V10 engines, but they sound absolutely phenomenal. And the Carrera GT definitely sounds amazing. Not quite up there with the Lamborghini Gallardo, but it's getting close. Next up, the other Porsche supercar. This is the Porsche 959, 450 horsepower, 3,190 pounds of weight. Now, back in the day, this car competed with the Ferrari F40. This was back when manufacturers were trying to push their cars to go over 200 miles an hour to reach that critical 200 mile an hour mark. The 959 just missed out on it, and then about a year later the F40 came out and embarrassed it. However, at one point this was the quickest mass production car in the world. That being said, it isn't that nice to drive. It has got four-wheel drive, unlike the F40. And as far as comparing this to the F40 going around the track, the F40 was brilliant handling, it had a bit more power, and dare I say, it may even be a bit quicker in a straight line. The 959 four-wheel drive means that it is kind of understeery, which is a bit of an issue with this vehicle. By kind of understeer, I mean it's very much oversteery, unfortunately, for the 959. Straight line speed's pretty decent, though. Again, I'm not really sure what would be quicker out of this between the Ferrari F40 and the 959, but that four-wheel drive handling kind of just let this car down a little bit, it has to be said, but it wasn't the worst car to drive around here. And finally today we got the Porsche 718 RS60, 160 horsepower, 1,280 pounds of weight. Now, the 718 is a car I was genuinely curious about because previously the older race cars do pretty well around here. Ferrari 250LM did a 120 something, and the Alfa Romeo 33 Speciale is mixing it up with supercars, so I was kind of curious to see how the little Porsche would do. Now, 160 horsepower and 1,280 pounds of weight makes it the least powerful car here today, and also the lightest. This might actually be one of the lightest cars we've ever had go around the track. This thing is extremely light. Now, how does it drive? Well, it drives kind of similar to the 911 Turbo, the 83 model. You turn in, you turn in, you turn in, and then all of a sudden the rear end kind of snaps out on it, which is, it means it isn't the nicest car to drive. Out of all the historic race cars I've had around here, this is probably the one I've enjoyed the least when it comes to its driving patterns. Still, the 718 is pretty decent. It can take fairly decent corner speed. Straight line speed isn't great, but for 160 horsepower, it's definitely surprising how much speed this thing can take. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. But ultimately, I would rather drive the Alfa Romeo 33 or the Ferrari 250LM. Anyways, onto the times, and the GT2 RS was the fastest car of the day with a 1:13.999. That's ridiculously quick. That's almost mixing up with hypercars. That's very quick indeed. Porsche Carrera GT goes into 26 with a 1:14.871. Beats out McLaren F1, although it is a second down on one of its chief rivals back in the day, the Ferrari Enzo. Still extremely good times for both of those vehicles. The Carrera isn't too far off an Aventador, actually. Going down the board, the 911 Turbo S goes into 41st with a 117.001, beating a Ferrari F50 by a thousandth of a second. And it's quicker than all of the four-wheel drive supercars, the Audi R8 V10, the Nissan GTR. Yeah, that's the quickest out of all of that bunch of cars. The Porsche 959 goes into 54th with a 118.081, missing out on the Ferrari F40 by over 3 seconds, but it isn't too bad of a time. I mean, it's faster than an SLS AMG GT350R, but ultimately 959's handling let it down. The 996 goes into 66 with a 119.620, which isn't too bad. That mixes it up with the higher end of the modern sports cars, a bit slower than Jaguar F-Type, but faster than an XKRS GT and a Porsche Cayman, actually, so that's pretty decent. The 718 goes into 83rd with a 121.503, beating out a Corvette C5 and a bit slower than a BMW M5. That's still quicker than a BMW M4 and a Lexus RCF, so that's very impressive, but not quite as impressive as the previous classic sports cars. And finally today, the 911 Turbo from 1982 reaches 123rd with a 126.745, a little bit quicker than a Mercedes G-Class, a Plymouth Prowler, and a little bit off a Ford Focus RS Mark II and a Golf R. Yeah, not too impressive at the time from that car. The handling just kind of let that one down. Anyways, friends, that was some Porsches going around the Top Gear track. I hope you did enjoy. If you have any suggestions for episodes you'd like to see in the future, then please let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell. I'm pretty impressed, got through that without making an entire Beetle joke. That's quite impressive. Oh wait, how did this get in here? Oh god. Oh, I'm gonna be stoned to death by the Porsche community. Oh, Christ. Well, it's here now. You can watch it go around the track if you want. I haven't got enough air in my lungs to carry this thing around the track, so you can just watch it go around if you want, and the time will be at the end. Yeah, thanks for watching.